Okay, everybody, now we're going to be talking about some of the problems with decision making that occur when groups get together. Groups do not do everything perfectly. Sometimes things go wrong. So we're going to talk about some of those things. One of the things we're talking about is the planning fallacy. Basically, people tend to underestimate how much time it's going to take to do various aspects of some kind of a task. This bias is even worse when it comes to groups. So basically, if there is a group that is planning to have this kind of a project, to meet, to talk about this particular issue, to discuss the issue, to decide on the issue, and implement the solution, well, they're going to underestimate the amount of time it will take to do all of those things. So basically, they're already setting themselves up for failure if time is of an issue in whatever they're trying to do. Another issue is the problem with discussion. Is that sometimes just the way in which we talk with each other during a meeting can be problematic. If you have poor if a meeting is poorly run, if people have poor discussion skills, then there may not be a lot done. There may be a lot of pointless talking, but not a lot done. And of course, the death by meetings idea is just how a lot of people complain about this. Talk to one of your professors and ask him how much they enjoy going to faculty meetings, and they're probably not gonna be say that they like it very much. Oftentimes meetings, you kind of sit through meetings and maybe not much is done, and you have to listen to a lot of issues that may not seem important to you, and it's interfering with the work that you're trying to do. So oftentimes people really hate going to meetings, and again, the problem is that sometimes the meetings are not very productive, which makes it much worse. Interestingly enough, is that oftentimes the time spent at meetings is on trivial stuff, and maybe the important stuff doesn't really get talked about too much. So that's kind of an irony there. And again, it's muddling through the issue is you're not really uh, really getting at the issue clearly and directly. You're being evasive. You're not really doing what you need to do. So here are some of the problems in discussion, for example. Like egocentric behavior is something you probably see a lot of. One or two people trying to dominate the meeting, monopolize the conversation, uh, manipulating others, putting, perhaps just showing themselves to be seeming more important than anybody else. Of course, you'll also see non-participation. People will attend meetings, but they don't really participate. They'll just sit there, and maybe they will, go on their cell phone or something and do nothing. I've seen this at faculty meetings as well. Not participating, they're just there. Um, Sidetracking is, of course, something that commonly happens. Is you go off on a tangent, an unrelated issue, and it takes the time away from the issues that really need to get discussed. Participant interruptions. A lot of people like to hear themselves talk, and they will interrupt somebody else when they're talking. They'll talk over somebody else, and that's of course not very good. Sometimes the leaders of the meeting are not really doing a good job of keeping things organized. I can tell you many times that I've been to meetings where the meeting was supposed to end at 12 o'clock, and it ends at like 12:45, and that gets everybody upset. And that can happen if the meeting is poorly run. And of course, though, again, you also have people who have bad attitudes. Things can go wrong at meetings, but it doesn't mean you have to be a jerk, which sometimes happens at meetings as well. And essentially, all that does is just make things go longer, even. So, best to be on good behavior when you're at a meeting, even if things are not going the way you'd like it to. At least be polite and civil. And again, interesting that the research seems to confirm that at a meeting, it's not like everybody at the meeting is doing the same amount of participating. Even in a four-person group here, for example, one person is talking like about 32% of the time. Another person here is talking maybe 17% of the time. So there's an unequal distribution of the amount of participation in meeting, which indicates that the people who are not participating much, maybe their voices aren't really being heard, they're being ignored, and somebody else may be monopolizing the conversation. We touched on this a little bit before in the last lecture about the shared information bias, is that we tend to talk about things, at a meeting, people talk about things in which everybody at the meeting knows about, but you're reluctant to talk about something that only you know about. It's easy to have a back and forth conversation elaborating on information you already have, that everybody already has, and it feels like you really discussed something. But if you know something but you don't bring it out, it could be that could make your decision different, and that's the problem. But you need to spend more information on the information that we all have, and not as much information, not as much time spent on uniquely unshared information. Informational, the reasons for this, could be, social influence. With informational influence, maybe, you're being guided by the information that your colleagues are talking about. It's reinforcing what you already know, so it feels good to keep on going with it. It's also normative influence. You may want to bring up something that you know about, but you're drifting the conversation away, and maybe other people will be disturbed by that, so you're afraid of doing it because you don't want to be judged as a rude person or as someone just, messing up the camaraderie there. This is an important one. This is a key factor in groupthink, is the emphasis on consensus versus correctness. You want everybody to agree. You're not necessarily looking for it's more important that everybody agree and less important to get the correct or best answer. Thus, people just are searching for just the common agreement, and that's that. But again, there are a number of ways in which you can get people to agree, or at least say they agree. And that's a problem, is that people may disagree privately, but agree publicly. Your initial preference also guide how you're going to approach your discussion. In other words, if you have a particular prior idea about what the decision should be, you're going to lead your conversation in that direction, particularly if you're the leader. Finally, impression management is also a factor here. You want to present yourself to others, and that's part of, everybody does impression management. We have to present ourselves to other people. But, impression management, you may be trying to portray a positive image of yourself rather than trying to come up with the best decision and give the most pertinent information. So one of the things that you could do is, with a good leadership, is perhaps to make sure that everybody has a voice and everybody each individually talk about the information that they have. This way, all of the information can be revealed, rather than people feeling like they need to hold back. You can increase diversity in a meeting, which is also, a way that you can make sure, because people from different perspectives also have, different. People have, coming from different backgrounds, they have different perspectives, they have different knowledge bases, so it's useful to have it not just all homogeneous set. You want to be able to have some diversity in your group. Let's talk about some of the cognitive problems, the cognitive limitations that come about. Basically, decision making is, in part ways, is a cognitive process. When you are making a decision, you are thinking about it. It's a mental process as you think about it and go over it in your mind as far as what you're going to do, whether you're going to agree or disagree, guilty or not guilty, whatever it happens to be. Your decision making, you're basing it on that. But we are biased people, and we often take cognitive shortcuts, and we often will engage in faulty thinking, and that can get us into trouble. And here are some common examples of ways in which our mental processes don't work as they could. Okay, one type of error is, if you under the category of sins of commission, something that you're acting, is belief perseverance. And this happens when you may have a pre-existing belief about some factor having an impact on the decision you're making. Okay? But let's say examining the evidence shows that your fears are unwarranted and that the actions of this particular person or that particular person is really not going to have any effect on the issue that you're dealing with. But if you continue to believe in it, even if you've been debunked, people continue to believe in it. People continue to believe in false, beliefs about, beliefs about climate change is a good example here. If you have a belief that climate change is just it's a conspiracy to increase the power of government, and that there really is no evidence that climate change is happening, you might stick with that belief even if the evidence really doesn't support it. That's an example of belief perseverance. And again, of course, this can happen in groups. If groups develop a belief about a particular issue, even if the evidence is proven wrong, they still stick with it and kind of base their decisions on that faulty information. Here's a good common one: the sunk cost bias. You are reluctant to abandon a course of action once the investment has been made. And the bigger the investment you've made, the more likely you're going to stick with it. This is often talked about in terms of business, in terms of finance, in terms of investments you make. So let's say you spend $10,000 on a particular stock, okay? And what happens now if the stock starts going down, 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 down? Now your $10,000 investment is now worth $8,000. And maybe it keeps going down, 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 down. Now it's worth $6,000. Okay. Now you've invested $10,000 in here. Now it's down to like $3,000 or $4,000, whatever. Now you can decide to just sell your shares and get the heck out of there, or you are most likely going to stick with it. You might even buy some more shares because you've already invested your time, money into this, and you don't want to go back. You want to keep going with that. But unfortunately, if we're talking about a bad decision, the bad decision just continues on to its disastrous end. Like example in the Bay of Pigs invasion talked about in the textbook. Extra evidentiary bias. Again, if you're talking about using information that really you're supposed to ignore. This is common. You'll see in a courtroom. If you've ever seen, either a prosecutor or a defense attorney make a statement, and then the judge said, and then the other lawyer says objection. The judge says sustained. Don't talk about this. If the lawyer already says something, the jury hears it, and the judge may tell the jury, disregard what this attorney just said. It's still going to be in their mind. Use that for them. Finally, another sin of commission is the hindsight bias. the tendency to overestimate, how accurate you'll be based on past events. It's easy to look back and see how you could have predicted the future based on the event that already happened. So, if LSU lost to Alabama, you say, oh, I knew they were going to lose even before they started playing. Well, if you knew they were going to lose, how come you didn't bet $100 that Alabama was going to win? So you see it as an example here is that it's easy to look back and see how the events played out, and imagining that you were able to accurately predict it, but you're really not. It's a bias. A couple of the sins of omission here listed here. The base rate bias, the base rate fallacy. If you're failing to pay attention to the base rate, and this is like statistical general information, and failing to use that information to make a decision, you're often going to run into problems. Let's say, for example, I tell you that I have in this room a group of 100 people, and I'm going to tell you that 90 of them are Harley-Davidson motorcycle mechanics. Okay? And I'm going to tell you that 10 of them are librarians. So I reach into the classroom and I pull one person out. And this person is a quiet, mild-mannered, well-dressed person. And I'm going to ask you to tell me whether you think this person is a librarian or whether you think this person is a Harley-Davidson motorcycle mechanic. And you are going to, and then I might ask you how sure you are about that decision. So, if I tell you the mild-mannered, well-dressed, clean-cut person, and I tell you that your best decision, your best guess should probably be that that person is a motorcycle mechanic. Why? Because among that group of people, 90% of them were the motorcycle mechanics. Only 10% are librarians. So when I just grab one person at random and bring them out there, there's only a 10% chance that that person is actually a librarian. But you're ignoring that information by guessing that that person is a librarian. So you may still be correct, but the odds are against you for making that decision. And of course, my favorite is the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error, it is an error that we all make to some degree, and this can cause us and it can cause groups to make poor decisions. Maybe a group deciding on whether or not a person should get, sentenced an extra 10 years or something like that. When you're trying to understand a person's behavior, when you're observing somebody's behavior, and you want to make a judgment about why this person did this, okay? The fundamental attribution error, you are overestimating personality as a reason why this happened, as why this person did it, and underestimating situational factors. Ironically, we tend to reverse this with ourselves. If we do something stupid or immoral, we would look at situational factors that led us to do this. We would not say that we are stupid and immoral people, right? So this is an example. So with us, we'll attribute when we do the bad behavior, we'll say it was just the situation that led us to it. But when other people do it, we'll say, well, this is a failing in their moral character. It's their personality. That's why they do these things. So we got to be careful of that. The availability heuristic is another bias that we might have. We might be making decisions on information that is just readily available right up front to us, right in the front of our mind in particular. And So this can essentially mean that we're making a decision just based on what's at hand, what's readily available, rather than digging deeper to find out what may also be thing. The conjunctive bias is failing to realize that the probability of two events happening together is always, always, always going to be less than the probability of just one of the events happening together. So when we automatically, you might join two things happening together. So we see a person do a particular behavior, and we just assume automatically that the person might be doing another kind of behavior too. If he's drinking, okay, he must be doing drugs as well. What's the probability of him doing drugs? What's the probability of him drinking? What's the probability of him doing both drugs and drinking? Well, you might automatically associate the drugs and the drinking, but you're always, it's always going to be a worse guess than just the drinking. Finally, the representativeness heuristic. Oftentimes that we rely on stereotypes. We rely on, the information, again, that comes right to our minds, what's salient. And, it could be misleading. We think about, to what extent is this person, we see that this is representative of the particular group, and we kind of just make that click connection, but it's incorrect. So all of these are ways in which our mental processes, our cognitions, can kind of get us into trouble. Finally, let's talk about some of the problems that happen after you make a decision. Sometimes, oftentimes after making a decision, you're supposed to kind of look back and see whether or not you dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, and did your due diligence. But oftentimes we don't do that. Instead, we tend to just defend our decision to the death, even if our decisions are stupid. So we deny responsibility for making mistakes. If we make a mistake and make a poor decision, we're going to say, oh, there was nothing wrong with our decision. It just was because of X, Y, and Z that it didn't work out. Bay of Pigs was a great idea, but it was all these other factors that were just out of our control that just happened. And, well, if I could do this decision again, I'd make the same decision because I knew it was the right one. They still don't admit that they made a mistake. This is denial of responsibility. Kind of keeps you making the same mistakes again. The Abilene paradox, I think you read that in the textbook. Kind of a group sitting on on a nice quiet afternoon. They decide to take a long trip to Abilene to go to dinner in Abilene just for no reason, and nobody thinks to even stop and say, "Hey, wait, this is a silly idea." We'd all just kind of follow everyone else and kind of do it automatically, and even you might assume that other people think it's stupid too. You don't realize that other people think it's stupid too. You're just kind of going along with everybody else. So that can kind of get you into trouble there. And finally, we also mentioned entrapment and sunk costs in a particular issue that can get us stuck in making a bad decision and sticking with it. Even though it was a bad decision, you've already invested money and time and whatnot, and you kind of stick with a decision, stick with a program that may not work just because of all that sunk investment that you have in it.